Why was she sitting in silence at the briefing table, when every man around her spoke as if she wasn't there? Lieutenant Catherine Hayes, Cat to the few who dared shorten her name, kept her eyes fixed on the map pinned to the board. The Philippine Sea stretched like an endless wound of blue ink, marked by arrows and red lines. Enemy formations, expected intercepts, coordinates of battle that, if anyone had been honest, no one could predict with certainty. Her fingers tightened around her pencil, not to take notes, just to remind herself she still existed, because in that room, filled with veterans who spoke in clipped voices and rehearsed bravado, she might as well have been invisible. She was the only woman in the squadron, and she was about to fly a machine the Japanese had mocked for months. "They're slow, heavy, can't outturn a Zero," one of the young lieutenants whispered just loud enough for her to hear. His smirk said the rest. Catherine didn't flinch. She had heard the same words at Pensacola during training, at every carrier deck since being assigned to Task Force 58. The Hellcat was dismissed as a brute, a blunt weapon forged by American industry to overwhelm, not outfly. And she was dismissed for reasons no amount of engineering could fix. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The briefing ended, chairs scraped, boots thudded. The men rose in a wave of practiced indifference, trading jokes about turkey shoot season, though none of them knew the phrase would echo in history hours later. Catherine stayed seated, studying the map until the room cleared. When the last footsteps faded, she reached out and touched the inked line that curved toward Guam. If she survived this day, it would not be because of what they thought of her. It would be because of what she had learned to think of herself. 6:30 hours. Flight deck of the USS Lexington. The morning light was harsh, bouncing off steel and salt spray. The smell of fuel clung to the air, heavy, almost sweet. Hellcats lined the deck, their folded wings casting jagged shadows across the men who worked frantically to prepare them. Catherine climbed the ladder into her cockpit, the metal warm already from the sun. She ran her hand across the dashboard, the way a violinist touches strings before playing. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine crouched beneath the cowling like a beast waiting to breathe. 2,000 horsepower. Too heavy, too slow, they said. But she had felt what it could do in dives, how it clawed through the sky when the throttle opened. She trusted it more than she trusted most men she flew with. The deck crew gave her the signal. She pulled her goggles down, heart packing with the rhythmic motions of checklists drilled into muscle memory. Oil pressure, fuel mixture, flaps, guns, 6.50 caliber Brownings, loaded, harmonized at 250 yards. Enough firepower to turn even the myth of the Zero into ash, if only she could keep her nerves steady when it mattered. The launch officer dropped his flag. The carrier shuddered. Catherine pushed the throttle forward, the roar of the engine swallowing thought, swallowing fear. The Hellcat leapt, heavy at first, then lighter as the sea fell away beneath her. Sky filled her vision, wide, endless, merciless sky. Climb, hold formation, await orders. Radio chatter crackled in her ears as the squadron took position. Commander McCampbell's voice, calm but sharp, anchored them. "We've got radar contacts. Multiple bogies inbound. 70 plus." 70, the number twisted in her gut. Somewhere out there, the Japanese pilots were preparing their attack. They carried more than bombs. They carried 3 years of unbroken myth, that the Zero was untouchable, that American planes were flying coffins. And Catherine carried the weight of proving otherwise. Her first memory of a Zero wasn't in the air, but on paper. She had seen it in the intelligence reports she copied late at night, when her instructors thought she wasn't paying attention. Maximum speed, 351 miles per hour. Turn radius tighter than anything the Navy had. Range long enough to fly in, strike, and fly home before anyone knew what happened. But paper never told the whole story. Paper didn't record how a Zero burned when hit at the right angle, how it crumpled under sustained fire. Paper didn't remind her of the young men who didn't come back in 42, their faces missing from the mess hall. She carried those absences more clearly than numbers. Angels 24, prepare to engage. Her hand tightened around the stick. The sea curved far below, impossibly distant as the formation leveled at 24,000 feet. Sunlight glinted on wings stretched in disciplined lines. Ahead, dark specks multiplied against the blue horizon. Then specks became shapes, and shapes became the swarm. Zeros with their slim silhouettes. Torpedo bombers lumbering escorted like sacred cargo. Dive bombers already angling for their prey. Her breath slowed. This was no drill, no theory, no whispers. The first Hellcats rolled into attack. Catherine followed, her stomach lurching as gravity seized the plane. Speed bled into her bones, into her heart, into the roar in her ears. 400 miles per hour. Fort Wentty. The nose trembled with the wind's violence. A zero flashed in her gun sight. She squeezed the trigger. The Brownings erupted, a staccato scream of fire and metal. Tracers carved the sky, glowing threads stitching into the enemy's wing. For 1 second the plane held together. Then it came apart, splintering into fire that fell toward the sea. Her first kill, or maybe her first survival. She pulled up hard, the Hellcat climbing against gravity's grip. A shadow sliced across her canopy, another zero diving to cut her off. She didn't turn. Every instinct screamed to dogfight to prove her reflexes. But she remembered the training, the words of her instructor: don't play their game, make them play yours. She kept climbing. The Zero tried to follow, but its engine strained, its frame lighter, weaker. At 3,000 feet it fell back. She rolled, dived again, found another bomber in her sights. Fired. Pieces of wing sheared away. The bomber lurched, helpless, plunging downward. Radio voices shouted confirmations, panic warnings. "They're braking," someone cried. Another voice: "Too fast, can't turn with them." Catherine's chest ached with something sharp, half relief, half disbelief. The Japanese weren't invincible. They were human, flesh and fear like everyone else. But victory never felt clean. Not when she saw parachutes blossom beneath the burning wreckage. Not when she thought of a mother halfway across the sea who would never know why her son didn't come home. The battle spiraled into chaos. Hellcats slashed through formations, struck, then disappeared before the Zeros could react. The sky became a graveyard of smoke and falling fire. And still, the enemy kept coming, wave after wave, driven by duty or desperation. By the time Catherine regrouped with her squadron, her hands were trembling, not from exhaustion, from the knowledge that she had crossed an invisible line. She had killed, she had survived, and she would have to keep doing both until this war ended. That night the carrier deck glowed dimly under red lights as crews worked in silence. The air smelled of oil and salt and burnt metal. Catherine sat on the wing of her Hellcat, helmet cradled in her lap. Her flight suit was still damp with sweat. Her ears still rang with the memory of gunfire. Someone walked past her and muttered, "Not bad for a girl." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. Because she knew something they didn't yet understand. The Hellcat was not slow, and neither was she. And tomorrow, the sky would ask her the same question it had asked today. Could she keep proving it? She looked up into the darkness, where no stars shone through the haze of war. And she whispered, not to herself, not to the men, not even to the enemy, but to the silence that swallowed everything. "I'll be there, even if you don't see me. I'll be there." What happens when silence becomes louder than the gunfire? Catherine heard it that night. Not the roar of engines or the staccato thunder of Brownings, just silence. It crept across the carrier deck after the last plane had been hauled below, after the crews had finished scrubbing the black stains where fire had licked steel. Silence pressed against her chest like a hand, heavy, unrelenting. She sat in the ready room, her logbook open but blank. She was supposed to be writing coordinates, kills, the neat arithmetic of war. Numbers that would look tidy in a report, detached, almost clean. But her pencil hovered, unmoving. How do you write down the sound a plane makes when it rips apart midair? How do you measure the weight of a parachute opening, followed by the ugly blossom of fire that swallows it whole? Her hand trembled. She pressed the pencil harder, drawing only a line. The door opened. Boots scuffed. Commander McCampbell walked in, his presence calm, almost too calm, like a man who had made peace with chaos years ago. He glanced at her logbook, at the empty page. "Trouble writing it down?" he asked. She hesitated, trouble believing it happened. McCampbell leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "First time does that." He paused, his gaze steady but not unkind. "It doesn't get easier. You just learn which parts to carry and which parts to leave behind." Catherine wanted to ask him how he chose, which parts he carried, which parts he buried, but the words never came, because deep down she feared his answer would be the one she already knew: you never really bury any of it. The next morning broke with steel skis and restless seas. Radar operators reported new contacts, another wave, larger, closer. The air hummed with tension as pilots strapped in. Catherine tightened her harness, each buckle clicking like the closing of a door. Her fingers brushed the patch sewn onto her flight jacket, a stitched emblem of a winged cat. A joke from training back when Cat Hayes was more nickname than burden. Now it felt like an omen. The launch officer's signal dropped, the deck shuddered again, and once more the sky swallowed her whole. At 20,000 feet, the horizon fractured with shadows. Japanese torpedo bombers in disciplined rows, Zeros swirling above like hawks protecting prey. Her radio hissed alive. "Remember, don't turn with them, hit fast, hit hard, break away." Her jaw clenched, discipline, always discipline. She dove. The engine's roar fused with her heartbeat. A Zero filled her sight picture, sleek, elegant, lethal. She fired. Tracers stitched across its fuselage, tearing it open like paper. The pilot never had time to react. Flames blossomed. Smoke coiled. One kill. She pulled away, but another Zero lunged at her tail. Warning sparks stitched past her canopy. Her breath caught, panic clawing at the edges. She banked, resisted the instinct to twist into a turn. No, not their game. She shoved the throttle, dove into the deep blue, let gravity and weight be her allies. The Zero followed at first, then it wavered, its engine screamed, its frame shook. At 450 mph it snapped back, unable to withstand the dive. Catherine leveled out, free. She exhaled shakily. They weren't gods, they bled, they broke. But survival was not victory. Below, torpedo bombers pressed toward the fleet. If they broke through, destroyers and carriers would pay the price. Catherine scanned, spotted one breaking formation, slipping lower, aiming for the Lexington. Her breath slowed. She lined up, steady hands despite the shaking in her chest, fired. The Hellcat's 6 guns thundered and the bomber's wing erupted. It rolled, nose pitched down, plunged into the sea short of its mark. The Lexington lived another hour. Her radio crackled, "Nice shooting, Cat." She froze. It wasn't mockery, not dismissal, just recognition, simple, real. For the first time she felt seen. But recognition brought its own weight, because now they expected her to keep proving it. By midday the air was thick with smoke and wreckage. More than 200 Japanese planes had fallen. Catherine landed, refueled, launched again. Each sortie blurred into the next, a rhythm of roar, fire, silence, and return. Exhaustion numbed her body but not her mind. With every kill came a deeper unease. Was she saving lives or just trading them? Did the mathematics of war add up to something more than absence? That night she lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The ship creaked with the endless motion of the sea. Around her, the air was filled with quiet breathing, restless turning. Pilots who would fly again tomorrow, some who would never wake. She thought of home. Her mother's letters, written in neat cursive, filled with prayers. Her father's silence, the silence of a man who never wanted his daughter in a cockpit. She thought of the Japanese pilot she had seen bail out earlier that day, his parachute blossoming white against smoke. For a moment, she had felt relief he lived. But seconds later, his chute caught fire. She shut her eyes now, wishing she hadn't seen, wishing she could forget. But memory has its own gravity, and it pulls hardest in silence. The following dawn brought no mercy. Another wave, another climb into the sky. This time she wasn't nervous. She was tired, too tired to feel much of anything. Her squadron rose into formation. Engines droned. Voices over radio recited bearings and contacts. Routine, as if routine could mask the truth. Each mission was a coin toss with death. The first sight of the enemy came sharp, sudden. Dive bombers descending like daggers, Zeros swarming behind. Catherine tightened her grip on the stick. Break, break. Hellcat split apart, diving into the fray. Catherine chose her target, lined up, fired. Metal shredded, fire bloomed, another kill. But this one felt different. She saw the pilot's canopy open, saw his face just for an instant, young, sharp, not so different from the boys she'd grown up with back home. His eyes widened, not in rage, not in hate, but in surprise. Then he was gone. Her chest clenched. She wanted to breathe, but the air felt too thick. She pulled away, higher, faster, desperate for distance. The battle below blurred. Fire and smoke tangled with sunlight, the ocean gleaming like a mirror shattered by falling steel. Her radio buzzed with voices, triumphant and terrified, blending into a chorus she could no longer separate. She realized then, the true enemy wasn't just the Zero or the bomber or the myth of invincibility. It was the silence that followed, the silence she would carry home, long after the noise of battle ended. When she landed hours later, stumbling from her Hellcat, her body shook, not from fear, from the weight of all she had seen. On the deck, one of the younger pilots grinned at her. Guess the Hellcat isn't so slow after all. She managed a nod, but inside the words echoed hollow. Because she knew the truth. Speed meant nothing if your heart couldn't keep pace. And hers was already falling behind. She stood at the edge of the deck, staring at the horizon where the sun bled into the sea. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the waves, fractured by ripples. She thought of all the reflections swallowed by these waters, faces lost, names forgotten, stories untold. She whispered into the wind, the same promise she had made before. I'll be there, even if you don't see me. I'll be there. But the question haunted her as night swallowed the sea. How long could she keep that promise before the silence claimed her too? Why did the Japanese pilots start calling them demons? Catherine didn't know yet. Not on the morning of June 19th, when the third wave came screaming across the sky. She only knew the look in their maneuvers, something brittle, almost frantic. The precision that had once made the Zero untouchable was fraying, replaced by hurried dives, reckless turns, and a desperation that stank of fear even at 20,000 feet. Fear was new. Fear had never belonged to them before. The radio squawked in her ears as radar reports streamed in. 100 contacts inbound, bearing 180, distance 70 miles. The ready room had been a tomb before launch. The younger pilots whispered about ratios, about odds. Some clung to numbers like scripture, 2 kills for 1 loss, 3 for 1. They didn't know yet that by the day's end, the ratio would climb to 20 to 1. Ratios didn't matter when you were the one staring down tracers. Catherine had sat quietly, helmet in her lap, eyes fixed on the table. She thought of her mother's last letter. Remember, Kitty, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. But she did. Every single flight was proof. Proof she belonged. Proof she could survive. Proof that the silence of the men who doubted her didn't define her. The deck crew had waved her off. The Hellcat roared skyward again. And now, in formation, she looked out across the wide horizon where dark specks multiplied against the ocean's sheen. Zeros, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, more than she could count. Her squadron leader's voice cut through. We engage. Remember your training, don't get pulled into turns, hit and break. The mantra over and over, discipline, always discipline. The first clash was violence without warning. Hellcats dove, guns flared, Zeros spun into fire. Catherine lined up a bomber, squeezed, felt her plane shudder with the recoil. Tracers stitched the fuselage, engines burst into flame. The bomber nosedived, trailing smoke like a dying comet. She pulled away, scanning. Another Zero locked on her wingman, his gun sparking. Catherine Dove rolled under, opened fire. The Zero broke apart mid-turn, scattering across the sky. Her wingman's voice cracked in her headset. "Thanks, Cat." It startled her, the ease of it, the casual gratitude, as if she had always been part of this brotherhood. For a split second it felt good. Then the guilt hit, because she had seen the Zero pilot's face in her sights. Young, determined, human. Her stomach twisted. The battle raged. Zeros tried to press their advantage, turning sharply, but the Hellcats refused the dance. Boom, zoom, climb, discipline. Catherine followed the pattern, resisting instinct each time. Each refusal felt like betrayal of her own nature. Every nerve screamed to fight head-on, but discipline was survival. And survival was victory. The Japanese chatter picked up on radio intercepts told a different story. Catherine didn't understand the language, but the tone carried. Desperation, shock, too fast, too strong, voices breaking. Later, intelligence officers would translate the words. Demon aircraft, impossible fighters. She didn't know it then, but already the myth of Japanese invincibility was shattering midair. For her, there was no myth, only the enemy in front of her, the gun beneath her hand, the silence waiting to swallow her afterward. By noon, the third wave had been torn apart. Scores of Japanese planes littered the sea. American losses were shockingly light. The pilots returned, landing one by one on carrier decks, trembling with fuel fumes and smoke. Catherine climbed from her cockpit, helmet heavy in her hands. Sweat plastered her hair. Her body ached from hours of tension. But what weighed most wasn't her muscles. It was the memory of eyes. The moment before a face vanished in flame. She walked to the edge of the deck, leaned on the railing, stared out at the sea. Black smudges dotted the water, oil slicks, burning wreckage, lifeboats where no one lived long. Her stomach lurched. She gripped the rail tighter. A voice broke her trance. "You flew clean." She turned. It was Lieutenant Briggs, the same one who had sneered at her in the briefing days ago. His expression was unreadable, pride, maybe, or reluctant respect. She didn't answer, she couldn't. Because part of her was proud, yes, but the other part, the part that saw not just victory but the cost of it, that part was breaking. That night she sat alone in the mess, tray untouched. Around her, men laughed, swapped stories, exaggerated kills. The bravado was armor, each joke a shield against what they had really seen. Catherine didn't join. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger, listening but not hearing. Why did some men need to laugh to forget? And why could she not forget at all? Sleep came late, dreams came violent. Smoke, fire, faces. Her body woke in sweat, chest tight. She lay staring at the bunk above her, listening to the ship's endless heartbeat. And she wondered, was survival really proof of anything? Dawn came again, orders came again, another wave inbound. Her body obeyed before her mind caught up. Suit up, strap in, launch. This time the sky looked different. The Japanese formations were thinner, less disciplined. Their numbers still intimidated, but something in their flight betrayed fatigue, hesitation. Her squadron dove. Catherine targeted a dive bomber, fired, destroyed. Another Zero swung in, too slow to stop her. She climbed, turned, struck again. The rhythm felt mechanical, almost unreal. But then her radio hissed. A voice she knew. "Briggs, I'm hit, can't." Static. Her chest clenched. She spun, searching. Smoke trailed from a Hellcat below, spiraling, wings broken. A Zero followed, closing in for the kill. Without thinking, Catherine dove. Her guns roared, tracers slicing across the Zero's fuselage. It exploded, fragments spinning away. She pulled alongside Briggs's wounded plane. His canopy was cracked, blood streaking his face. He looked at her, wide-eyed, desperate. She locked eyes with him, nodded once firm, "Stay with me." Guiding him back was harder than any dogfight. His plane shook, struggling, but she stayed close, her shadow a constant on his wing. The carrier deck loomed ahead. She radioed the crew, her voice steady though her heart thundered. "One inbound, heavy damage, prepare crash net." Briggs's Hellcat landed hard, skidding, catching on the arrestor wire. Sparks flew, but it stopped. He lived. When Catherine climbed out of her own cockpit minutes later, the deck crew cheered. Briggs, bloodied but alive, stumbled toward her. He stopped, eyes meeting hers, words catching. Then simply, "Thanks." For once no sneer, no doubt, just truth. She nodded, silent, because words were fragile things and silence carried more. That night, as she lay awake again, she thought about what had shifted, not just in the battle, in her. She had proven herself, yes, but in proving herself she had also learned something deeper. Proving meant nothing if you didn't also remember what you carried. The silence, the faces, the weight. The Japanese pilots were calling them demons now. She wondered if that was true. Because sometimes, in the roar of engines and the scream of guns, she felt less like a savior and more like a shadow passing judgment. And the question that haunted her most was not whether she would survive tomorrow. It was whether, if she did, she would recognize herself at all. What happens when victory feels heavier than defeat? By the afternoon of June 19th, the ocean itself seemed to change color. Smoke and oil stained the waters black. The horizon shimmered with heat and wreckage, an unbroken trail of burning steel. Catherine stood on the flight deck, helmet under her arm, watching the recovery of yet another sortie. Pilots staggered out of cockpits, drenched in sweat, some laughing, some silent. Every Hellcat that returned was a miracle. Every one that didn't, its absence hung heavier than the wreckage still smoldering at sea. Her hands shook as she traced her fingers along the bullet holes pocking her Hellcat's fuselage. The armor had held, just barely. She whispered to herself, "Not this time, not me, not yet." Then the klaxon sounded, another incoming wave. The crew sprang to life. Planes were rearmed, refueled, shoved back onto the deck with practiced chaos. Catherine swallowed the lump in her throat, shoved her helmet back on, and climbed into the cockpit. By the time she was airborne again, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the clouds in streaks of red. Beautiful, almost too beautiful for the carnage waiting ahead. Radar confirmed it. The fourth wave, 80-plus enemy aircraft, desperation in formation. Her squadron tightened ranks. Voices buzzed in her ears. She hardly heard them. Her heart drummed, her breath shallow. She was flying on instinct now, the motions automatic, like a pianist playing from memory even when the music no longer made sense. Then she saw them. Zeros, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, all rushing like a final storm. Break! The Hellcats dove as one. Catherine's body pressed into her seat as gravity pulled her downward, the engine screaming with power. She lined up a Zero, fired, its wings shredded, smoke trailing as it spiraled away. Another target, another burst, another plume of fire. The sky erupted into chaos. Planes collided, broke apart, spun downward. Catherine weaved through smoke, bullets slicing past her canopy. Her wingman's voice shouted something she couldn't make out. A Zero flashed across her nose. She fired, too close, too fast. The enemy exploded so near the shockwave rattled her teeth. Debris streaked across her fuselage. For a second she thought she was hit, but the Hellcat held steady. Her lungs burned. Her hands ached from gripping the stick. She wanted to scream, to release the pressure inside her chest, but all she could do was breathe, fast, shallow, desperate. Then she saw it. A squadron of torpedo bombers low, angling toward the carriers. If they reached the fleet, dozens of men would die. Cat, you're closest, take them. Her mind screamed no. Not again, not more. Her body moved anyway. She shoved the throttle, dove straight at them, guns blazing. The first bomber erupted in flames, plunging into the sea. The second shuddered under her fire, breaking apart. She pulled up, circled, came back again, relentless. One by one they fell. But one slipped through. Her breath caught. It streaked toward the Lexington, torpedo glinting beneath its belly. No! She dove hard, lined it up, fired. Bullets ripped through the bomber just seconds before release. It burst apart, fragments raining into the sea. The torpedo fell harmlessly, sinking before it armed. Her chest collapsed with relief. She saved them this time. Her radio erupted with cheers, voices calling her name, her call sign. Cat got it, she got it. But the sound felt hollow, because she knew what no one else saw. She wasn't saving lives. She was taking them again and again. The last of the Japanese broke, retreating, chased by Hellcats until the horizon swallowed them. Silence fell again, the kind that rang louder than gunfire. When Catherine landed, the deck crew clapped her on the back, their faces bright with relief and adrenaline. Briggs, still bandaged, pale, managed a grin. You're not just one of us. You're better than half of us. She nodded, forced a smile, but inside the words scraped raw. Better, worse. What did those words mean when the sea was filled with bodies? That evening the ready room buzzed with reports, numbers scrawled on chalkboards, hundreds of enemy planes destroyed, American losses almost negligible. A miracle they called it, a slaughter others whispered. Catherine sat in the back, hands folded, eyes distant. She should have felt pride, should have felt victory, but all she felt was the weight pressing heavier with each name she hadn't learned, each face she would never see again, enemy or friend. McCampbell's voice broke through. We've broken their back, he told the pilots. Today we proved what the Hellcat can do. Today we changed the war. The room erupted in cheers. Catherine didn't join, because she knew something the numbers didn't say. War never changes, not in the ways that matter. Later, alone on the deck, she leaned against the railing, staring at the sea painted orange by sunset. The smell of salt and smoke filled her lungs. She thought of the Japanese pilots, men who had called them slow, men who now called them demons. And she wondered, was there really a difference? She closed her eyes, hearing again the cheers, the radio chatter, the hollow words of recognition. And beneath it all, the silence. Always the silence. She whispered into the night, the words steady, a vow to herself more than to anyone else. I'll keep flying, but I won't forget. Because forgetting was the real death, and she wasn't ready to die, not yet. What do you do when the enemy stops coming? That was the question echoing in Catherine's chest as dawn broke over the Philippine Sea on June 20th. The water stretched calm, almost serene, as if mocking the truth, that less than 24 hours earlier, the sky had been filled with fire and death. The ready room was quieter than usual, not the silence of fear but of exhaustion. Pilots slumped in chairs, eyes hollow, laughter forced. Some scribbled in logbooks, others just stared at the floor. The chalkboard still bore the numbers from the previous day. 244 Japanese planes destroyed, 23 American losses. The men called it victory, they called it a miracle, some called it justice. Catherine called it heavy. She sat in the corner, helmet resting on her lap, staring at the tally as if the numbers themselves might confess their secret. Because behind each digit was a story that would never be told, a name lost, a family waiting in silence that would never be broken. She wondered how many of them had whispered to themselves as she did, "I'll be there." The announcement came mid-morning. Another mission, not defense this time, pursuit. Japanese forces were in retreat. Task Force 58 was to launch a long-range strike, beyond normal combat radius. Risky, dangerous, fuel would be tight, but the chance to finish what they had started was too tempting for command to ignore. Catherine's stomach tightened. Yesterday had been survival, today felt like something else, something closer to vengeance. On deck, the crews prepared the Hellcats, Dauntlesses, Avengers. Catherine climbed into her cockpit, her hands steady though her heart raced. She thought of her mother's words again, "You don't have to prove anything," and wondered if she had already gone too far to remember what that meant. The launch officer's signal dropped, the carrier trembled, her Hellcat leapt skyward once more. For hours they flew, the horizon endless, fuel gauges dropping lower with every mile. The silence in her headset gnawed at her nerves. Too far, too risky, but discipline kept her going 1 minute at a time. Then at last contact. The Japanese fleet, carriers, cruisers, destroyers, still powerful but stripped of their shield of aircraft, vulnerable. The order came, all units commence attack. The sky erupted again. Dive bombers screamed downward, torpedoes dropped, explosions thundered across the sea. Anti-aircraft fire clawed upward, black bursts punching holes in the sky. Catherine dove into the chaos, weaving through tracers, guns rattling. She strafed decks, tore into parked planes, silenced gun crews. Each burst of fire left her more numb, more hollow. The Japanese fought back, but their strikes lacked the ferocity of before. Their carriers burned, their formations scattered. And in the middle of it all, Catherine felt something strange. Not fear, not pride, emptiness. Because victory felt like absence. She pulled up, scanning. A lone Zero rose from a burning deck, limping, desperate. It turned clumsily toward her. She could have ignored it, let it fall into the sea on its own. But her guns fired anyway. The Zero disintegrated. The pilot never had a chance. Her hands froze on the stick, her breath catching. She hadn't needed to. It hadn't been survival. It had been what? She didn't answer herself. She just climbed higher and higher until the sky itself felt empty. The radio called for regroup. They had to return before fuel ran dry. The flight back was agony. Gauges dipped lower and lower. Engines sputtered. Pilots whispered prayers. Some never made it, ditching into the sea, hopping for rescue. Catherine's tank hit red just as the Lexington came into view. She landed hard, almost skidding off the deck, but caught the wire. Safe. Barely. When she climbed out, her legs buckled. Crewmen grabbed her arms, steadying her. She nodded, forced a weak smile, then stumbled below deck. The debrief was short. Success. Japanese carriers crippled. Enemy retreat complete. The war in the skis had turned. But Catherine didn't feel like celebrating. She slipped out, climbed back onto the darkened deck, and sat on the wing of her Hellcat. The sea stretched quiet again, as if none of it had happened. She closed her eyes, and in the silence, faces came back. The young Zero pilot, eyes wide with surprise. The torpedo bomber crews trying to reach the fleet. The parachute that had burned before it touched the water. She pressed her hands over her face. What happens when the enemy stops coming? You're left with yourself. And that was the battlefield she feared most. Later, as the stars emerged, Briggs limped across the deck to find her. Bandages still wrapped his side, but his eyes were steady. He sat beside her in silence, the two of them watching the waves. Finally he spoke. "You saved me, Cat. Don't think I'll ever forget that." She didn't answer right away. She just breathed, steadying herself. Then, "I don't want to be remembered for who I killed. I just want to be remembered for who I saved." Briggs nodded slowly, his face lit by the faint glow of deck lamps. "Then you already are." His words should have comforted her. Instead, they only deepened the ache inside. Because she knew the truth, every life she saved came at the cost of another, and she would carry both weights forever. The sea whispered below, endless and patient. Catherine looked out at the horizon, where the war would go on, where silence waited with open arms. And she whispered back, barely more than a breath, "I'll be there even if you don't see me. I'll be there." What happens when silence becomes strategy? By late June, it wasn't just the sea that grew quiet, it was the sky. Catherine felt it first on patrol. Her Hellcat roared steady, the propeller a blurred halo, but nothing stirred on the horizon. No Zeros diving, no bombers crawling across the blue, just clouds, endless and white, as if war had evaporated overnight. She almost didn't trust it. Her eyes kept scanning, her body tense, waiting for the sudden glint of wings, the spark of tracers. But nothing came. When she landed, the deck felt different too. Crews still moved with urgency, but there was no panic. The klaxon stayed silent. The chalkboard in the ready room bore fewer tallies each day. Intelligence officers whispered what the pilots already knew: Japanese aviation was breaking. Losses too heavy, training too shallow, pilots too young, too unprepared. McCampbell called it a turning point. Briggs called it victory. Catherine called it strange. Because silence had always been her enemy, now it was everywhere. She sat on her bunk that night, logbook open. Her pencil hovered, ready to write, but what? No kills today, no close calls, just empty space. She wrote one word anyway: silence. The days blurred, patrols with no contact, deck watches where the horizon stayed empty. The silence settled into her bones until she carried it everywhere. But silence has edges, and in the stillness the memories came sharper. The Zero pilot's eyes surprised, the torpedo bomber spiraling into the sea, the parachute that burned. Each night she saw them more clearly, not as enemies, just as men. She woke in sweat, heart racing, as if the silence itself hunted her. One evening she found herself on the deck again, leaning over the rail, the ocean stretching endless. The sun dipped low, the water bleeding crimson. She thought of all the men beneath it, friend and foe alike. The sea had become their grave. Briggs joined her, limping still, his bandages fresher now, tighter. He leaned beside her, silent at first. "Then you ever think about them?" She turned. "Who?" "The ones we shoot down." Her breath caught. She had never heard another pilot say it aloud. "All the time," she whispered. Briggs nodded slowly. "Me too." For a moment she felt less alone. But silence crept back in. The next week brought orders, long-range sweeps over Japanese-held islands, not dogfights, raids, destroy planes on the ground, burn airfields, strangle what was left before it could recover. Her Hellcat flew low, strafing lines of parked aircraft, tearing through wings that never lifted. She watched them burn, the smoke rising in columns. Some planes never left their shelters. Some pilots never even strapped in. It should have felt easier than combat. It felt worse. Because there was no fight in it, no chance, just destruction. That night she sat on the deck wing again, staring at her hands. They shook less now, steady as stone, but inside she felt herself splitting apart. She remembered her mother's words: "Kitty, you don't have to prove anything." But maybe she already had, maybe too much. The war was changing. The Hellcats ruled the sky now. Kill ratios soared, 10-1, 15-1, numbers that seemed unreal. Men bragged in the ready room, laughed about turkey shoot season, called it easy. Catherine sat in silence, because to her nothing about it felt easy. One patrol she flew alongside Briggs. His voice came over the radio, steady but softer than usual. "Funny, isn't it? We used to be the ones outmatched. Now they don't stand a chance." She didn't answer. She only thought, is that funny, or is that tragedy? Later, when they landed, he asked her why she hadn't replied. She told him the truth. "Because I don't know how to laugh about it." He didn't press. He just looked at her, really looked, and nodded. Word spread across the fleet. The Japanese were pulling back. Entire air groups destroyed. Training programs collapsed. They were running out of experienced pilots, running out of fuel, running out of time. The war wasn't over. But the skis, they already belonged to the Hellcats. And still Catherine felt no lighter. Because silence wasn't peace. It was just another battlefield. She wrote in her logbook again that night. Not kills, not sorties, just words. They called us slow. Now they call us demons. I don't know which is worse. She closed the book, set it aside, lay back on her bunk. In the dark the ship creaked, the sea whispered. And she whispered too, her vow unchanged, though each time she said it, it felt heavier, more fragile. I'll be there, even if you don't see me. I'll be there. But part of her wondered if silence would one day swallow even that. What happens when the war outside ends faster than the war inside? By autumn of 1944, the skis no longer belonged to the Zero. They belonged to the Hellcat. Catherine knew it the moment she saw Japanese pilots break away before a fight even began. Once, they had come head-on, fearless, certain of superiority. Now, too often, they scattered, diving toward the ocean in desperate bids to escape. She should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt something hollow. Because war without resistance didn't feel like victory. It felt like hunting. Patrols turned into sweeps. Sweeps turned into strikes. The Hellcats flew over Japanese-held islands, torching planes on the ground, silencing airfields before they could even rise. Catherine's guns cut through rows of parked aircraft, some never fueled, some never flown. She saw pilots running for cover too late. The ready room turned those days into tallies, chalk marks rising like scoreboards, laughter louder, stories sharper, kill counts growing like legends. But Catherine sat in the corner, logbook open, pencil still. The numbers no longer meant anything to her. They were just weights added to a scale that never balanced. Briggs noticed. He always did. One night he found her sitting on the wing of her Hellcat again, the ocean stretching silent beneath the stars. "You look like you're carrying the whole war on your shoulders," he said. "Maybe I am," she answered, voice quiet. He sat beside her, leaning back, staring at the same sky. "You saved my life, Cat. Twice, maybe 3 times. If you're carrying weight, let some of it be that." She wanted to believe him, wanted his words to carve light into the darkness inside her, but she couldn't. Because she carried the other faces too, the ones she had ended, the ones she couldn't save. "Do you ever think," she whispered, "that maybe we're not winning the way we think we are?" Briggs frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound like betrayal. "We're destroying them, completely. But what's left when there's nothing left to fight? What happens to us when the only thing we know how to do is kill?" Briggs didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, the sea whispering beneath them. Finally, he said, "Maybe that's why someone like you has to be here, to ask those questions, because the rest of us don't." Catherine turned to him, surprised. For once, she didn't feel invisible. But recognition didn't lighten the weight. It only made her wonder how long she could keep carrying it before it crushed her. The next mission came at dawn. A carrier strike on Japanese shipping lanes. Catherine's squadron lifted into the pale sky, the horizon painted with gray. Her Hellcat climbed steady, the roar of its engine familiar, almost comforting. She touched the dashboard again, the way she always did, a ritual more prayer than habit. They reached the convoy by mid-morning. Cargo ships, tankers, escorts, all vital to Japan's war machine. Vulnerable. The attack began in waves. Bombers dove, torpedoes streaked, Hellcats strafed. Catherine lined up, fired, saw her tracers rip across a deck. Men scattered below, tiny figures caught in chaos. She pulled away, heart pounding, bile rising. She had done her duty, but she couldn't shake the sight of men running, not soldiers, just sailors trying to survive. Her radio crackled, Briggs's voice tense, "Cat, on your 6." She jerked the stick. A Zero flashed past, guns blazing too close. She rolled, dove, heart hammering. The Zero came back, persistent, not retreating this time, desperate, determined. She pulled into a climb, felt the Hellcat strain, engine roaring. The Zero followed, lighter, sharper. For a moment it gained. Her breath caught. This was no easy kill. This was survival again. She rolled hard, dove into a boom and zoom attack. The Zero tried to turn, but too late. Her guns thundered, tearing its wing clean off. The plane spiraled, smoke trailing. The pilot ejected, parachute opening. Catherine froze, watching him drift down. And something inside her broke. Because she wanted to feel relief, wanted to think he'll live. But she knew what awaited below, the sea, the silence. And she knew, too, that the next time she might not hesitate to fire at the parachute. The thought terrified her more than the Zero had. She flew back in silence, hands steady but heart unraveling. When she landed, she climbed from the cockpit slowly, each step heavier than the last. That night she didn't go to the ready room, didn't sit with Briggs on the deck. She went to her bunk, shut her eyes, and listened to the ship's heartbeat. In the darkness, the war inside her roared louder than the war outside. Voices whispered, her mother's, her own, the one she had silenced with fire. You don't have to prove anything. But maybe she had already proved too much. She whispered again into the silence, the vow she could no longer let go of, even if it no longer felt like hers. I'll be there, even if you don't see me. I'll be there. But this time, her voice cracked, because she wasn't sure who she was promising it to anymore. The war was turning, the enemy was breaking, victory was near. And Catherine Hayes was breaking too. What do you do when the shooting stops, but the silence does? August 1945. The sea was calm, the sky clearer than she had ever seen it. For once there were no specks on the horizon, no engines in the distance, no sudden explosions turning calm into chaos. The war was ending. Catherine stood on the deck of the USS Lexington, helmet tucked under her arm, the Pacific wind lifting stray strands of her hair. Around her, the crew buzzed with the impossible news. Japan had surrendered. The enemy who once owned the skis now had none left to give. She should have felt joy, relief, triumph. Instead, she felt weight. The Hellcat behind her still bore its scars, bullet holes patched, paint worn, its steel frame tired from endless sorties. 12,000 of them had been built. More than 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. A kill ratio unmatched. They called it the machine that won the Pacific. But Catherine didn't see a machine. She saw faces, the ones who didn't come back, the ones who never had a chance to, the ones who fell into the ocean, swallowed without a sound. She thought of Briggs, still limping but alive, of McCampbell, whose calm voice had guided them through chaos, of the young pilots who had joined later, bright-eyed, too eager, some never making it to their second mission. And she thought of the Japanese pilots, boys not much older than she had been when she first sat in a cockpit, their eyes wide with surprise, fear, defiance, eyes she still saw when she closed her own. She whispered to herself, the war over, but the words felt fragile, like glass ready to crack. That night the ready room was loud with celebration. Men raised cups, laughed too hard, shouted too long. Catherine sat at the edge, her smile faint, her hands wrapped around her mug though she never drank. Someone slapped her back. You did it, Cat, we all did it. They'll write about this for generations. She nodded, but what would they write? Numbers, ratios, victories. Would they write about silence, about weight, about how some pilots carried more ghosts than medals? She doubted it. Later she slipped out, leaving the noise behind. The deck was quiet again, stars scattered above like fragments of shattered glass. The ocean whispered, patient as ever. She walked to her Hellcat, placed a hand on its scarred fuselage. It felt cold now, no engine humming beneath, just steel, just silence. She remembered her first flight, the laughter, the whispers, too heavy, too slow, too weak. And she remembered proving them wrong, again and again, not for recognition, not for pride, but because survival had been the only answer. She leaned against the wing, staring out at the horizon. She thought of home, her mother waiting with letters that had always ended in prayer, her father who had never wanted her here but who might now, finally, understand. She thought of the vow she had whispered to herself time after time. I'll be there, even if you don't see me, I'll be there. She had kept it, somehow. But now, with the war ending, she wondered who she would be without it. Because survival had defined her. And now, survival was no longer the question. Briggs found her there, as he always did. He stood beside her, his limp slower in the dark, his voice soft. It's over, Cat. She nodded, eyes on the water. Is it? He hesitated. For us, maybe, for them too, but for you, he trailed off, then added, you'll figure it out. She didn't answer. Because she knew the truth, some wars never end, they just go quiet. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not unbearable. For once it felt shared. Catherine looked up at the stars again. The same stars she had seen before every sortie, before every dive, before every moment she thought might be her last. They had been there all along, constant, watching. She closed her eyes and breathed. The war had ended, the silence remained, but she would live in it, carry it, learn to shape it into something else. Maybe memory, maybe warning, maybe hope. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in her silence, Catherine Hayes knew she would never forget.